Hey YouTube, how is it going? I hope all is well. Today we're going to talk about a couple different things. I am going to do the favor of getting the thing I actually want to talk about out of the way first, and then putting all the crap that you probably don't care about later on in the video. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's go over to the screen here. So today we're going to kind of follow up a little bit on the Mojotone thing that's going on. Andy and Mojotone are not going to have any kind of a partnership, so I am learning. More or less, it was kind of one of those things where Mojotone realized they had a problem. They were trying to abate any fallout from that, so they hit, Andy up, Lederman that is, more or less, it was like, hey, take this stuff down. Please stop hurting us, and maybe we'll work out a partnership sort of thing. Wink, wink, nod, nod, type, that sort of thing. Obviously, they probably had zero intention of actually doing that. They got their guys in there to do what they needed to do to fix a few things. They've added the wiring diagrams from Hayboer for the output and power transformer. That is a good thing. It definitely helps clear some of that stuff up. And then they obviously modified the layout, at least, of their thing. You can see the revision date here of 2/27/2025, and you can see that they split those wires up and put something over that clearly indicates that they are insulated and separate from each other. That is great. So that is a good thing that they went and did that, but it's just also kind of a bummer that it was just more of a saving face kind of thing for them to have done. I don't know. All I know is that it's good that they did it. They needed to do it. It's a bummer that it couldn't go further than that, where they had somebody do some more real work for them, because there's a lot of issues both in the schematic and in the, well, we're going to talk about that. So, things I don't like about this particular schematic here. I think I need to sneeze. But in either case, you can see here, it's supposed to be a 76 era 2204. I do not know of any 2204 amps that are wired like this one is. I don't understand why they even bothered trying to do a high and a low input. I would have went with a normal and a bright input. The low input is technically the gainiest of the two, and it's just full range, right? It's got an 820 ohm cathode resistor, so it's biased pretty hot. It's got a 250 UF bypass cap, so it's fully bypassed. I mean, that's ginormous. I wouldn't have gone with that high of a value. I think 25 UF would have been just fine. Maybe that's what it actually comes with. I don't know. And then it uses a 22 NF, which is a 0.022 UF coupling cap right there. So this low channel actually is giving it all the beans, if you will. Whereas the high channel is definitely a high channel. It's bright. It's a bright channel. That's what it's meant to be. 2.7K cathode resistor, definitely colder biased, and a 680 NF, which is a 0.068 UF bypass cap. So it's getting a lot of just the highs kind of bypassed here. So it's just going to be brighter. And then they went with a 2.2 NF, which is a 0.0022 UF coupling cap. So it's pretty thin. This is going to be a pretty wiry channel right here, especially with the Stratocaster. Another thing that is kind of odd about it is that, these guys here do not cascade to each other. They are mixed into the preamp volume. And instead of using two preamp, volumes, one for each one, and then mixing them with mixer resistors, they mixed them first into that preamp volume, and they only used 100K. So there is going to be a little talk back between these two. So usually you would use 220K as high as up to like 470K. I can see why they didn't go with 470K. It would darken things up quite a bit. I would probably go with something more like 220K, to be honest. But that is beside the point. It is just a little interesting. I guess a way that you could do this that would be kind of cool would be to use a Y cable on the input, and then run your one input in, and it feeds both the high and the low input, and then you use this preamp volume and you get both channels pushing into this thing at the same time. That would be kind of a cool way to do it. Or you could just wire it internally so that your high or low input is feeding both channels all the time anyway. You could do that if you wanted. Nothing crazy over here. Something that is a little interesting is they went with a 330K plate resistor. That is not very common. Usually it's 100K in this position here. 220K is generally about as high as you go in something like this. 330K is up there. Like, they're really trying to get this channel here, or this part of the circuit here, to give up the ghost. They're just really working that portion of the circuit. It probably sounds great. I tend to find that higher value plate resistors get a little more sterile sounding, I guess is the word. They're very highly compressed, I guess is the word for it. So it's like there's no squish under the fingers, and it's very almost too articulate. That is a me thing. If it sounds good, it is good, right? So there's that. Let's see here. Everything else is pretty much, box standard for the amp. I would prefer to not use 220Ks here. I would like to go with 100Ks. And then I would go with bigger coupling caps here, like, 0.1 UF or something like that. I see why they did this. There are a lot of 22 NF caps or, whatnot in this amp, but everything else is pretty standard for this thing. So there's nothing crazy going on in the output section of this thing. One of the reasons I don't particularly care for cap cans, as they call them, or multi-cap cans, is because you have to share the ground generally. And let's look at that a little bit here. You can see here that this cap can has 2 nodes on it, or 2 capacitors, but they share a common ground. All of them do that, right? And you can get cap cans that have 3 nodes in it and still only 1 ground. I'm just not a fan of that. It's not an ideal way to do an amp build if you can. It does help get things kind of closed up a little bit so you get more space elsewhere. It opens up space on your turret board so you can use a smaller footprint, right? And then of course these guys here obviously use up less space elsewhere that you could use. Moving on. Anyway, it's not ideal though, because you can see here that you got node A and node B on the same ground, which is both of these circuits up here. You got XA and XB, which are 2 separate circuits. So we've talked about it in the past, where we now know that coupling caps basically end a circuit, right? A local circuit. We're going to call it a local circuit. Basically, it doesn't allow DC across, and because it doesn't allow DC across, it means that this circuit on this side over and from here in doesn't have a reference to this other circuit over here. This is a DC operating, system here. The only AC signal that's in this amp is in the signal that, feeds the grids of each of these tubes, right? Everything else is DC. Well, that means that you don't necessarily want to have B and A sharing the same ground. Well, with a cap can, you kind of can't get around that. So it works, don't get me wrong, it's just not the best way to do it. That's all. Another thing that I'm not a super duper fan of is that they use the same symbol for all of these grounds here. Only one of them is technically correct, and it's this one here. This is a chassis ground, or in this case here, I call it earth ground, but it's chassis ground. This is the one that allows all the naughty stuff to get out. It is the safety ground. It is the one that protects you from all this other crap here. These other ones here could either be the signal ground or this earth ground. I go with this symbol here just because I like the look of it, and in our instance, the way that we're utilizing things, it is appropriate to use it. It is meant to be used as a ground for a particular circuit, and then that earth ground would then combine with all the other ones in like a star ground situation. So in a star grounding situation, let's say we pick this point right here in the middle of this thing here, and all of these would converge to that one point. That is okay to use for that earth ground, as they call it here. That is what I basically use for my local grounds that would go to the one common spot. And then of course the only other grounding point that you would have would be this one here. In theory, there are, I guess, 3 different ways you can do a grounding scheme. We've talked about this in other videos. And we're going to use a slightly different one in this particular layout that I'm going to show you in just a moment. So do be mindful that, try to be appropriate with how you use your grounds. Signal ground is probably the technically most correct. Chassis ground always is the safety ground. And then earth ground, you can call it your local grounds if you want, however, whatever. But do be mindful of that. It is important because they did it right here, right? They did it right there, except for that one. They used the wrong symbol. I don't know, whatever. Little things. I just nitpick. Okay, so a couple things that I'm not happy with their layout here. First and foremost, let's get the whole grounding thing out of the way. We do not use the back of the pots as a ground lug. Period. Ever. Just get it out of your idea, remove the idea from your head that you're ever going to solder anything to the back of a pot. Let me take a sip. All right, so why, right? The back of the pot is crimped on. It is a metal shield that is simply there to shield the internals of the potentiometer. It is crimped on to the back of the pot. Some pots do have metal bases that therefore can complete the circuit to the chassis of the backside of that pot to help shield the internals, etc., right? But that means that the pot in and of itself is grounded to the chassis. So why do you need a bus bar to go across the back of it if the pot itself is already technically grounded, right? Q mark. So now you've got the pot that has a connection to the chassis for ground, and then you've got a bus bar that goes across that links them all together. So you've got, multiple ground possibilities within this thing. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. You do not use the pot as a place to ground things. So, I don't know. Just don't do it. All right? That is one thing I don't like. Another thing I don't like is that I call it the other side of the amp. So when I build or try to do a layout, I try to imagine an imaginary line. It's not imaginary because you can actually tell, but the center of this turret board is one half of the amp, and this other side of it is the other half, right? So if you cut this turret board in half, I try to keep all the HT stuff, all the high voltage stuff on its side of the amp. And then I try to get all the ground and other lower voltage stuff on its side of the turret board or amp. So when you take something like this here where the HT comes in and it goes over here and feeds this guy, that's great. It's on its side of the amp. But now you've taken this guy here and ran it all the way across the thing. And then you run a wire that goes from this side of the amp all the way across to the other side of the amp and literally crosses probably 2/3 of all the components within the amp needlessly. Like, why not just make it shorter here and then just run it like down to there, right? It still crosses the same number of parts, but at least it's not going all the way over here needlessly. Little things like that. They took this guy here and they ran it again from one side of the amp all the way across to the other side, and then you got this wire that goes over to through here. Why didn't they just do it like this here? I don't understand. So little things like that kind of bother me a little bit. So I try to optimize the layout to get rid of incidences like that where things crisscross each other that don't need to. Other things that kind of, bother me a little bit is you can see here, they got wires that crisscross all over the place. Every single one of them is basically crisscrossing another one in some way or another. I try to keep things lined up in such a way where this isn't the instance. Basically I try to get this guy over here somewhere so that it doesn't have to crisscross both of the cathodes in this particular case. It's not that it's the best way to do it necessarily, but it just makes sense, right? So little things like that kind of just bug me. And then like this stuff here where you got this bent lead, I don't like that kind of crap. To me, that is considered a flying lead. Flying leads are not good, which is why I don't like other things like this guy here. This is a big cap. Like that thing is pretty sizable. And you've got it literally floating in the air, attached at 2 points. Not good. You really want to get that thing connected securely on a turret if you can. And we're going to see in my layout right now what I'm talking about. All right, so do not get too concerned about this area right now. I wired it like this to make it clear what is going where. You do not necessarily have to wire it like that. Do what they did, run everything out to the outer edge of the chassis, along that edge, and then shoot it up this little alleyway here. You can make it look all pretty like they have here. You can do the same thing with mine with all of this gickety gack here. Get it out to the edge of the chassis, run it over, and then up. So let's talk about what it is that I did that was a little bit different. Not a whole heck of a lot, really. One of the big things I did that was different was this HT run here. This would be where that 10K ran across. Well, I didn't do that. I put this over here, and then it went to here, and then that 10K is here, allowing it to supply its thing to this node, right? So much simpler. Like, I didn't even have to put that turret there realistically. You could, if you really, really wanted to, take this wire, run it all the way over to that point right there and be done with it. And then you just have that simple jump there. But this was non-incidental to do it like this, and it gave it a spot that was a little bit closer. I guess you could have even put it over here if you wanted and just run it over. Whatever. Bunch of different ways. So you can kind of see how there's a little bit of an art to this, and everybody's idea of how to do it is a little bit different. So, moving on. The bias circuit. I did it a little bit differently. I like having things on turret boards, and I don't like things shooting off at odd angles just to try to reduce using one turret, right? There's no need to. You can make it look clean and pretty, symmetrical, all that jazz. And everything is just a little bit more secured when you have the parts in there the way they should. When you do this kind of stuff here, it gets a little weird because you know that you need to bend that resistor out of the way a little bit. So you end up with this thing that's just got an odd angle, kind of like this one here. This one here has to go out and over. It doesn't look good. This is nice that they did it this way, but I like things being straight. It makes it easier to work on too later. So whatever. Anyway, I moved this down a little bit instead of having it connected directly to the things. These are probably about that size. I used 100 UF here. Even though I put 8 UF, I sized it as if it were 100. This just gives you more space to work on things and keeps things separated a little bit easier. It just makes it easier to work on. This guy here would work the same as theirs here. I don't have as pretty of a layout, program as these guys do. Again, I don't really like floating leads here, so the idea was that getting it done the way I did, you'd still put that turret right there underneath it. You attach the pot, and then you'd have a very short wire that runs from the center lug of the pot over here to the bias circuit. So there's that. You'll also notice that I have kind of everything running up in their little lanes here. Again, one of the big ones is the feedback circuit here. Negative feedback is a very touchy circuit. You want to have this interacting as little as possible with any other circuit within the amp. So get this cable here, or this wire, down on the chassis so it's out of the way and far away from everything else, and then get it up into this point here. You can see I left this nice little alleyway here on both sides to make sure that this circuit here, the negative feedback loop, is well far away from all the other gickety gack. I ran it up this way, and you could use a coax cable here, use the shield for this connection and this connection here, and then use the the hot lead of the coax to run that wire if you wanted. That'll help clean it up a little bit. I would refrain from trying to run it straight over and like that in an L. This makes it a little bit shorter, and it makes sure that it doesn't get involved with these guys here. It will interact with other parts of the circuit, so you want to try to keep this as far away as you can from everything else. These wires here, you can bundle them together, so you could run them into a single hole and then up, and then have them lay as they need to across the top here to make it look all clean and pretty. You can do that. This is all part of the same circuit here. These should not interact with each other, and you should be fine running at least these three together in a group, and then maybe this one, if you wanted, you could run separately and kind of make it look pretty. However you need to do it. These guys here, obviously, you would tuck up a little bit cleaner into the back there. Little things like that. I went with lugged, grounding points, kind of similar to how they did it. It shows here kind of like, they got a ground tab. I did the same, except for I added ground tabs to other parts of the amps. or other parts of the amp, excuse me. I moved this one over here. I think that's kind of the better way to do it. Even if it's here, that's fine. Freaking fly, don't bother me. In either case, however you need to do that, this one's fine. As long as it's not connected to the same tab as this one here, you're okay. This one is probably one of the more important ones. You want to make sure that the secondaries and this first node here goes to that tab. And that's the only thing that connects at that tab. And it must be separated from this. Do not use the power transformer or any other transformers, screw lugs or whatever, to attach these to the amp. It must be connected or fastened to the amp with its own, you know, bolt or screw or whatever you want to call it. Preferably one that has a tooth lock washer or lock ring and a I'm losing my words here, but you know, the lock nuts with the nylock nuts or whatever. I like nylock nuts or nylon lock nuts because they are a little bit more secure than just using like Kep's nuts. But you know, at least at the very least, use a Kep's nut, but make sure it's very, very tight, and do put something on it to make sure it doesn't come off. Either thread locker or paint the end of the screw so that it can't come unthreaded, whatever. But same with all these here. I just basically made so each node had its own ground point. This one here, I did not ground here. This cap can, I grounded it at the point where it's closest to the circuit that it's supplying to. So it is okay to run the ground wire up and over this way. Non-incidental. It does help clean things up a little bit. So, you know, if you have to run it out over and down this alley and kind of ziggy-zag it over to this point, totally fine to do that. This guy obviously goes down and then this guy goes over. However you need to do it, do however you want. But I did do that to make sure it is isolated as it needs to be over there. Same with this guy here. I did it over here at the input. This is probably the most ideal way to do it. So you can see that all this circuitry here is just grounded over here at the input. All this does realistically is just make it so everything has its own clear defined path to the exit of the amp, which is this guy here, right? The chassis ground. It just gives everything its own path. The likelihood of any kind of ground loop occurring in this circuit here, pretty much next to none. It's very, very far away from everything. We're not using the pots as a form of grounding anything. So you shouldn't have any problems doing it that way. So in either case, I hope this makes some sense. Something to note, this is kind of important down here. You can see I labeled some things here. So this goes to the choke. This comes from the choke. This goes to the output transformer secondary here. This one is important. The output transformer secondary should go directly to the speaker jack first. And then from the speaker jack, you will run another wire that goes to ground. That is important. You should make sure to do it as you see it here. And they did do that right in here as well. It comes from the output transformer directly to the speaker jack, and then from there it goes to ground. That is the correct way to do that. I didn't bother showing all the wiring for everything on here. This would be the 4, 8, and 16 ohm tap. I didn't clock this right. I didn't clock it the same way that they did anyway. So it's just, everything here is just to show that everything is connected in such a way. On theirs, they used a lug for each output tube. You can do that if you want. You don't have to. I like kind of having all the different parts of that sort of circuit ran together, right? So since these two are technically meant to be the same circuit, I like running them together and then to a single point. It's kind of like star grounding and then doing all the local grounds sort of thing. That's that idea first. All these wires here, so to run, I mentioned it before, run to the edge and then up this alley here, yada, yada, yada. I am okay with you using this layout. I didn't, modify anything. It is true to their layout and the components used, with the exception that I didn't put this snubber cap here and this guy up there. I didn't need to show them there. If you want to put them there, you can put them there. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Everything else is true to the schematic that they have here, values and all. So this one here, I would use 100 UF, to be honest. I think 8 UF is a little weak for where it's at in the circuit. Maybe not. Maybe it is filtered already. So you have to imagine well, no, it's actually not filtered where it's coming off at. Yeah, no, I would use 100 UFs there, to be honest. That is a me thing, though. You don't have to, but whatever. Let's see. Is there anything else that I can think of? That's about it. So you can kind of just see how this is a personalized form of art. So don't yell at me too much. Feel free to throw in your own ideas as to what could be done. The only other thing I can think of to note for you is that this wire here, and perhaps this wire here should be shielded wire or coax wire. These guys here, these 68K grid stoppers, I put them directly on the grid of the tube where they actually should be. You can see on there is that they put them up here. It serves no purpose to have them up there other than to darken the tone a little bit, because that's all they do is darken the tone a little bit when they're up there. It is best for their purposes of what they're meant to be there for, to have them on the pins of the tube. So I would do it like this. It is up to you on how you run these wires. I would definitely run this one along the outside edge. You could do that with this one as well and run it out that way as well. But there is a little alleyway here that you can run it. This one here, you may not need to have shielded, but you can run that wire down this little alleyway here. It is fine. I would not run it under the board. I would run it over the top. Get it up and away from things. The cool thing is that when this amp is laying down or in its upright position, gravity will want to pull these things down away from the circuit board naturally anyway. As for the grids here, the grid wires that go to the power tubes, I would twist them together like this. You don't have to, or you could use shielded wire. Again, you don't have to, but you do want to make sure that these kind of do stay to themselves. Twisting is okay, but when it comes to this feedback wire here, you definitely want to get them as far away from each other as you can. Having them twisted is helpful because it reduces the space that they come in contact with each other, and you want them to try to cross at as close to a 90 degree as you can. Again, everything here was just kind of put together to show how it works. I did not clock these the same as they have in here, so my 1 o'clock is probably closer to where the 9 o'clock is on mine, or my 9 o'clock is where the 1 o'clock is, which is actually going to help things a little bit more with this. These would actually clock in such a way that these runs would run up a little bit closer to being true and straight. So you'll even get less crisscrossing type action. So I think that's kind of cool. I was able to get it so these all laid out really nice and clean. That is a me thing. That's what I do. So in either case, I don't think I'm going to go into the other part I was going to talk about. I think I'm going to break it into another video. Initially, I was going to talk about, my preamp thing a little bit more and show you some other preamp pedals that are out there. Kind of give you some context on to why I'm into that idea, but I'm gonna forego that. We're gonna end it here. I want to thank you so much for sticking with me as much as you have. We'll see you again in the future. Take care. Goodbye.